The air in the stone-walled bathhouse does not merely hang, it breathes. It is a thick, living shroud, heavy with the sharp, medicinal ghost of dried hyssop and the deep, earthy sweetness of crushed rosemary. Through the swirling veil of white vapor, the world of the outside, the world of iron, mud, and the relentless tolling of cathedral bells, fades into a soft, indistinct memory. Here, the only rhythm that matters is the low, rhythmic hum of water cascading from a polished copper ewer, a silver thread of sound that stitches the silence together. You see the steam rise in slow, deliberate spirals, clinging to the damp skin of the stones like a second soul. To the modern mind, this is a luxury, a fleeting indulgence of the senses, but to the medieval heart, this heat is a crucible. It is a ritual of purification that blurs the jagged line between the corruptible body and the eternal spirit. To wash is not merely to remove the dust of the road, it is to strip away the weight of sin, to emerge from the water as if reborn from the womb of the earth itself. In the corner, a woman sits upon a low wooden bench, her movements possessed by a quiet, meditative grace. Her fingers, nimble and sure, weave through the damp tresses of her hair, working in droplets of lavender oil that catch the amber glow of a flickering tallow candle. There is a terrifying precision in her touch, a lifelong devotion to order maintained against the encroaching chaos of a world that feels as though it might break at any moment. She does not scrub with the frantic haste of the shamed, she cleanses with the steady hand of the faithful. This is the hidden truth buried beneath the layers of history, far from the caricatures of filth and the rotting reek of the textbooks. This is a world of communal steam and scrubbed white linen, where the coarseness of a woolen tunic is a penance and the smoothness of clean skin is a benediction. As the heat coaxes her pores to open, it uncurls the hidden anxieties of her mind, offering a fleeting window into a society that viewed a clear face as a reflection of an inner, unblemished grace. She pauses, her wet palm resting against the cool, sweating stone of the wall. In this sanctuary of water and wood smoke, she is preparing herself for the world beyond the heavy oak door, a world where every footfall is a trial, and every humble gesture must be a prayer. But as the last of the lavender oil disappears into her skin, the steam begins to thin, and the distant, cold reality of the parish well begins to call. Even here, in the heart of the warmth, the water eventually cools, and the shadows of the morning wait just outside the threshold, ready to test the strength of the spirit she has so carefully washed. The iron handle of the bucket bites into his palm with a cold so sharp it feels like a betrayal. In the blue, breathless hour before the sun breaks over the cathedral's jagged spine, the only sound is the rhythmic, agonizing creak of the hemp rope against the windlass, a wooden groan that shatters the frost-heavy silence of the parish square. He hauls the weight upward, gasping as a stray bead of water splashes his wool tunic and freezes instantly, a diamond of ice against the coarse fabric. To some, this is merely a chore, the invisible labor of a nameless apprentice, but in the bite of the winter wind, it is the first sacrifice of the day. As the heavy oak bucket clears the lip of the stone well, he catches the scent of the rising damp, and suddenly he is no longer alone in the dark. He is back in his mother's kitchen, watching her hands, those cracked, tireless cartographers of the difficult life, stirring a cauldron of lye soap. It was a brutal alchemy of wood ash and rendered animal fat, a mixture that could sear the skin if handled with haste, yet her hands always carried the lingering, ghostly sweetness of wild mint and crushed thyme. He remembers the way she would beat the laundry against the river stones, a percussion of survival, until the linen turned a bone white so brilliant it seemed to hum against the dark, churned mud of the village path. There was a sacred geometry in that whiteness, a quiet, desperate rebellion against a world that sought to bury them in the gray of the earth. In this age, to be clean was not an act of vanity, it was a defiant stand against the decay that waited at every corner, the rot of the fields, the shadow of the plague, the grime of the soul. He lifts a cloth to wipe the condensation from a silver basin, and for a fleeting second, the polished metal becomes a mirror. He stares at his own reflection, framed by the towering, silent buttresses of the church. In his eyes dwells the quiet dignity of a boy who understands that his labor is a holy bridge. Each drop of water he carries is a weapon against the darkness. But even as the basin shines, a different kind of shadow begins to stir within the physician's chamber, where the tools of purification take on a sharper, more clinical edge. A single drop of sharp golden vinegar falls into a basin of rosemary water, the ripple shattering a reflection of a man who fears the very air he breathes. Here, behind the thick stone ribs of the manor, the world of the freezing parish well and the apprentice's mud-spattered boots is a distant, shivering ghost. The chamber is a fortress of scent, a heavy, suffocating cloud of herbal pungency designed to act as a barrier against the invisible. Sunlight, strained through the uneven ripples of leaded glass, falls in bruised patterns across a row of polished pewter bowls, each one a shimmering eye watching the physician's steady hands. The nobleman sits in a silence so profound it feels brittle. There is no splashing of water here, no common immersion. Instead, there is only the rhythmic, soft rasp of a dry linen cloth against his skin. It is the sound of a meticulous, desperate grooming. This is the art of the dry wash, a high-born necessity practiced when the humors of the body drift toward darkness and the chaotic hum of the city outside feels like a physical weight upon the chest. He closes his eyes, feeling the abrasive heat of the fabric as it wicks away the day's invisible taints, a choreography of protection that treats the skin not as a surface, but as a sacred veil. His fingers reach out to trace the intricate embroidery on his chemise, a garment of the finest flax, bone white and changed with every rising sun. To him, this linen is more than cloth. It is a sponge for the soul, a filter meant to draw the poisons and the mal-airs out of his pores and into the threads. Every fold is a calculated defense against the spirits of infirmity that dance in the shadows of the unwashed. He believes, with a fervor that borders on the holy, that to be guarded with herbs and intention is to remain whole. But as the physician sets down the final cloth, the nobleman's gaze wanders toward the hearth, where the fire is dying into embers of ash and gray. He has guarded his body with iron-willed precision, yet even the most fortified heart seeks a different kind of cleansing, one that moves beyond the physician's bowl and into the warmth of a shared, blooming life. He wonders if the purity of the mind can ever truly survive the loneliness of the stone. Unaware that across the courtyard a bride is beginning a bath that smells not of vinegar and fear, but of roses and the terrifying promise of a new world.
A single bruised rose petal drifts across the surface of the steaming water, spinning slowly in the center of a wide wooden tub like a lost ship in a copper-colored sea. The air here is not the sterile, frightened air of the physician's chamber. It is thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of crushed sage and the floral ghost of summer gardens. The bride stands before the water, her breath hitching in the humid quiet. To her left and right, her sisters move in a soft, rhythmic blur, their hushed whispers a tangled symphony of girlhood, fears and secrets of marriage, and the bittersweet rhythm of a child ending in a single afternoon. The splashing of the water against the staves of the tub marks the tempo of her transition. As she steps into the warmth, she feels the weight of her father's house begin to dissolve. Her sisters work with a focused, almost fierce tenderness, using rough pumice and coarse loofah to scrub the stubborn dust of the village roads from her heels and the faint lingering scent of wood smoke from her skin. They are not merely washing a body, they are refining a soul. The grit of the harvested fields, the common labor of the hearth, and the lineage of her youth are being scoured away to reveal something new, something fragile. There is a visceral shift as the abrasive touch of the pumice gives way to the velvet glide of almond paste and honey. The texture of her world is changing beneath their fingers. Every inch of her skin is anointed, a sensory preparation for the cold stone of the altar and the heavy weight of the velvet gown that awaits her. In this small, sun-drenched room, the bath has become a sanctuary, the first threshold of a life that will henceforth be measured by duty and lineage. As she rises from the water, dripping and radiant, the rising steam coils around her limbs like a shroud of new beginnings. She stands suspended between the girl she was and the woman she is expected to become, her silhouette blurred by the white mist. But as she steps out onto the cold floor, the warmth of the ritual begins to fade, and her mind turns toward those for whom such purification is not a celebration, but a desperate, holy necessity. The healers and the holy men who walk the thin line between the living and the dead in the dim light of the monastery infirmary.
The heavy, iron-bound door of the infirmary creaks open, admitting a draft that shudders the candle flames, but the air inside remains stagnant, thick with the smell of damp wool and the metallic tang of old blood. In the center of this dim, hallowed silence, a monk moves with the deliberate stillness of a shadow. He dips a sea sponge into a steaming cauldron, a dark, foaming decoction of wormwood, wine, and crushed hyssop. As the sponge breaks the surface, the sharp, antiseptic sting of the herbs rises to meet the rot. A sudden, bracing scent of life cutting through the heavy sweetness of approaching death. The patient lies still, his breath a shallow rattle against the silence. Beneath the monk's hands, hygiene is stripped of its vanity. Here it is a visceral form of mercy. This is a labor of the hands that mirrors the sacred washing of feet performed by the saints, a belief that the spirit cannot be comforted if the flesh is left to wither in the grime of its own suffering. With slow, reverent strokes, the monk draws the sponge across the man's brow and chest, the heat of the wine wash blooming red against the pale, translucent skin. It is a battle fought with steam and cloth, a refusal to let the darkness of the earth reclaim a man before his time. In the flickering light, the monk watches the water in his pewter basin turn a slow, swirling gray. He sees the physical evidence of a long, punishing pilgrimage, the dust of a dozen shires, the salt of sweat, and the stains of the road, falling away into the murky depths. Every drop that splashes back into the bowl is a testament to a culture that refused to abandon the human body to the dirt. They saw the flesh not as a cage, but as a fragile vessel of the divine, a temple that required the constant, humble ministry of the heated cauldron and the scrubbed rag to remain worthy of the soul it carried. As the last of the herbs are applied, the monk looks toward the window, where the first pale light of dawn begins to touch the monastery walls. The patient's breathing has steadied, the fever broken by the cooling air, but the work of the hands never truly ends. Beyond these sacred walls, in the clatter of the marketplace and the hum of the weaver's cottage, the same battle against the shadows is being fought with bone combs and honeyed waters, a different kind of ritual, where the dignity of the living is maintained one careful gesture at a time. The rhythmic skeletal clack of the loom finally falls silent, leaving a ringing void in the dim air of the weaver's cottage. On the scarred oak table, a row of wooden combs clatters into place, their teeth stained with the oils of sheep's wool and the ghost of indigo dye. Outside, the world is retreating into a bruised twilight, but inside, the firelight begins its slow amber dance against the hanging tapestries. A woman sits by the hearth, her back aching from the day's labor, yet her hands do not rest. She holds a small, polished bone pick, meticulously tracing the crescent of each fingernail, scraping away the stubborn grime of the workshop with the focus of a jeweler. To a distant modern eye, this life appears as a monochromatic smear of brown and gray, a world of mud and unwashed misery. But to her, the air is a complex spectrum of status and scent. She remembers the marketplace earlier that afternoon, the way the sharp, citrus bite of an aristocrat's pomander, a clove-studded orange encased in gold filigree, pierced through the heavy, humid stench of wet wool and wood smoke. In this world, scent is a boundary, and texture is a language. To be clean is to claim a sliver of light in a world that often feels like it is drowning in the dark. She reaches for a small earthenware jar, her fingers trembling slightly with exhaustion as she unscrews the lid. The scent of honeyed rosewater blooms in the small room, a fragile liquid luxury that bridges the vast, aching chasm between the grueling toil of the loom and the quiet dignity of the evening meal. As she rubs the fragrant oil into her calloused palms, she is reclaiming her humanity from the machinery of survival. She is no longer just a weaver, she is a woman of order and grace. But as she finishes her ritual, the sound of a distant rhythmic sharpening echoes from across the lane, the slap-slap of leather on steel. Even in the deepest hours of the night, the work of maintenance continues. Somewhere nearby, a barber-surgeon is preparing his tools, ready to transform the rough, bearded faces of the common men into something sharp, disciplined, and fit for the eyes of God. The rhythmic slap-slap of steel against a leather strop is the only heartbeat in the gray, early hours of the town. It is a sharp, percussive sound, cutting through the heavy mist that clings to the timbered eaves outside. The barber-surgeon works with a mechanical, trance-like focus, his thumb testing the edge of a straight razor until it whispers against the skin of his palm. On a small trestle table beside him, a bowl of warm milk sits steaming, infused with a single dark sprig of bay leaves. These are not merely the tools of a vanity trade, they are the instruments of a solemn restoration, a weekly ritual that separates the man from the beast. The man in the chair is a laborer, his body a map of scars and sun-scorched toil, yet here he is motionless, surrendered. He closes his eyes as a heavy linen towel, plucked from a simmering cauldron, is draped across his face. The sudden damp heat is an overwhelming mercy, a moment of profound stillness in a life defined by the relentless clamor of the forge and the field. Beneath that towel, the grime of a week's struggle dissolves, softened by the steam and the scent of the bay. This is the grooming of the common man, a quiet, stubborn rejection of the myths we would later tell about him. He is not a creature of the mud. He is a man who seeks the sharp line and the clear skin as outward symbols of a disciplined, honest soul. As the barber begins to work, the razor glides through the thick, white lather with a clean, surgical hiss. With every stroke, a layer of the world's harshness is peeled away, revealing a face that is cared for, a face that is known. In this culture, the state of the beard and the scalp was a ledger of one's standing before God and neighbor. To be groomed was to be civilized, to be visible, and to be worthy of the light. The final splash of cold well water shocks the skin into a new wakefulness. The man rises, touching his jaw with a sense of quiet wonder, his dignity restored for the price of a copper coin. He steps out into the morning, where the cathedral bells are beginning to summon the faithful. The rituals of the bath, the laundry, and the blade have all reached their end, leaving behind a people who, despite the shadows of their age, clung to the belief that the purity of the flesh was the first step toward the salvation of everything else. The steam has cleared, the water has run cold, but the memory of the warmth remains.